Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Grant Writing 101 for Artists, presented by Amanda Karioth Thompson. I am Lisa Smalls, Director of Arts Resilience and Sustainability at South Arts, and I'm joined by my colleagues Hillary Crawford and Helena Haile Selassie. I'm an African American woman with long blonde braids, and I am wearing blue glasses with multicolored specs and a light blue button-down shirt. Before we begin, I'd like to offer some helpful tips for today's session. To turn on captions, click the Show Captions button in the meeting controls. If needed, choose the language for the captions if it's different from the default. Please place all questions in the Q&A pod. We want to reserve the chat for interaction with the slides and for conversation and connection with the group. A recording of today's webinar will be housed on the South Arts website in our resources section, and registrants will also receive the link and today's presentation materials via email. Lastly, please use the link that will be placed in the chat to complete a brief survey to help us better serve the field's needs and interests. And now I'd like to acknowledge our partners at the NEA. South Arts empowers artists and arts administrators by expanding access to professional development opportunities. Our free field building webinar series offers timely, topic-driven sessions that respond to the evolving needs of the field, providing practical tools, insights, and industry best practices. South Arts receives support from the National Endowment for the Arts through a partnership agreement to produce webinars such as these and conduct additional programs for our constituents across the region. Please visit our website as well as the NEA's website for additional information and opportunities. And without further ado, I turn it over to you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Oh my gosh, what a great day. I'm so glad to have everyone here. I'm looking at the chat and seeing where everyone's from. It's fantastic to have you all with us. I'm thrilled. Whether you're completely new to grants or just looking to polish your skills, I hope today's session will help make you feel more confident navigating the grant landscape. For the past 20 years, I've been an artist, an educator, and an arts administrator, and I've been on all sides of the funding fence as a grantee, as a grant panelist, and as a grant program administrator. I've built grant programs from scratch, and I've helped strengthen existing ones. I've also reviewed hundreds of applications, and I've written quite a few of my own. I've also coached all kinds of cultural organizations and creative individuals in crafting the best ask. So today I'm going to offer you the secrets that no one else tells you and share the most useful lessons that I've learned along the way to help you write fundable applications with less stress. So let's jump right in. Today's objectives are going to include focus areas like finding grants that align with your goals. And Hillary, if you want to show us the next slide, we'll take a look at some of the other objectives that I want to tackle today. So big one here is alignment with your goals. Another one is gathering the right materials before you start writing, crafting strong narratives that reflect your unique voice, being realistic about budgets and timelines, and celebrating your wins, recovering from rejections, and understanding what to do after you get a grant. And like Lisa said, we're gonna sort of wrap it all up with a live Q&A at the end. So hang on to your questions until the end, drop them in the Q&A section. Lisa's gonna help moderate that for me later. And I'll tell you, we've got a lot of ground to cover. So I'm gonna go through this fairly quickly, but please don't feel panicked if you miss something, okay? A recording of the session, like Lisa said, is gonna be made available, and South Arts is also going to send you my slides. So there's no need to take frantic notes, all right? So just sit back and listen, enjoy, and off we go. All right, the very first thing that we generally need to think about is where do we look for grant opportunities and what exactly are you looking for? So, grants provide funds that can be used to support you and your practice. And that might mean a whole host of different things. It might mean paying the rent, it might mean covering the cost of your materials and other expenses. It basically just means that this funding allows you to work at being creative. And artist grants, I think it's no secret, are pretty competitive. There are a lot of hands in a relatively limited amount of cookie jars. So the amounts that are awarded to and the stipulations that go with grants and the application procedures for each grant can vary widely. Some grant opportunities allow an artist to complete a specifically proposed project, while others are unrestricted. Some might award based on need, some might be more focused on artistic excellence. Some funding opportunities are open and eligible to just about any applicant that fits the criteria, and others might only be open by nomination or invitation. So, what I'm going to share with you is just a general outline that might differ from funding source to funding source, but it's basically the essential elements that you'll need in order to know how to get started. All right. So, let's just start with the fact that I'm going to be using the word grant a lot today throughout this whole session. But when I say that, just know that I'm being really pluralistic. When I say grants, I'm lumping in other forms of support too, like artist residencies or fellowships. I'm also going to be using the word grantor and grantee and grant panelist. So just to be clear, when I say grantor, what I mean is the folks who are the funding source, okay? The entity that's administering the grant opportunity, or maybe even the grant administrator themselves. Basically, the people with the money to give. When I say grantee, what I mean is you or any other people who have been awarded money. When I say grant panel or grant panelists, what I mean is the folks who are going to be reviewing and scoring your applications and making recommendations about which applications should get funded. Okay, so just some general language just to keep in mind throughout the conversation today. Okay, so funding opportunities often come from private foundations, they might come from philanthropies, but there are also publicly funded arts agencies that can be a good source of funding for many artists. There are lots of local arts agencies or LAAs, as it's often referred to, that provide financial support to individual artists and arts organizations. So check your LAA and see if they have opportunities or if they can connect you with opportunities that have some funding that's accessible to you. Many LAAs also have their own databases of grants and funding resources, so check those out as well. And in addition to your local resources, you might want to also think about regional and national options. And those might include folks like South Arts, folks like Americans for the Arts, which is a clearinghouse of information for artists, your state arts council, like here in Florida, we have the Florida Division of Arts and Culture. South Arts has their own grant program, and they also have lots of resources and support systems like this today to help you with your technique and your skills. Also, city and county cultural agencies and alliances are often good sources for information and opportunities, and nonprofit incubators can be as well. Another type of funding source is artist residencies. So keep your eye out for those opportunities too. Those typically require an artist to spend time away from their usual environment, and those residencies usually provide a studio space, maybe meals and housing, maybe travel and living stipends. So think about keeping those in mind too when you're thinking about potential like funding sources and support for your practice. Another way for artists to gain funding is to contact a nonprofit with a related mission that serves maybe as their fiscal agent or fiscal sponsor. So this is sort of a little bit of a hack. This allows artists to apply for grants under the sponsor's exemption status. So many grant opportunities are really only available to nonprofit entities, and the fact is, most artists aren't a nonprofit entity. So, as an individual artist, you can sometimes get around that by partnering with a nonprofit that will act as your fiscal sponsor or fiscal agent. And hopefully, they will come on as a collaborator for the project too. Another idea about where to look when you're thinking about funding and support, this is not a grant, but I do want to mention it. I want you to pay attention to tax, legal, and healthcare services that are available specifically for artists, either for free or at discounted rates. One example is the Health Alliance for Austin musicians. That's just one example. They provide access to affordable health care for working musicians in that area. There are also organizations that offer free tax and legal advice, so take advantage of those. We're not going to be talking about those kinds of, opportunities today, but I did want to mention it just so that you can kind of keep your eye for what's out there in terms of support. Lastly, I'd really like to encourage you to think about talking with your own network. You've got colleagues, you've got local curators and artist-run spaces. So check out those kinds of entities and institutions. Check out your museums in your area, the community foundation in your area. Join a guild. Talk with those members about the kind of funding opportunities that they've encountered in the past. Those dollars are out there, and you've just got to be really proactive about looking for them. So, one of the things that I typically suggest is to sign up for email newsletters and grant alerts from your state or city arts agency. Some of the sites that I'm going to share with you in just a second have some type of emailed newsletter that includes grant opportunities that are coming up. I will say though, one of my pet peeves about newsletters and grant alerts is that they sometimes don't allow enough time between the promotion of the grant opportunity and the grant deadline. So you may just want to bookmark some of the sites that I'm about to talk about so that you can visit them on your own, in addition to signing up for some of those email alerts so that if you need to, you can look a little bit further out ahead. Okay? So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about just a handful of grant databases and listings. These are just a few of my favorites. There are many aggregate sites and databases of funding opportunities out there. If you have a go-to source that you have found to be helpful, feel free to pop that in the chat right now. I know that might feel like revealing a closely guarded secret, but I gotta tell y'all, in all of my years of doing this kind of work, I have learned that artists are generous and uplifting people, and they really want to see each other succeed. So if you have a resource that has been really helpful to you in terms of seeking out new and different funding opportunities, throw it in the chat so we can help each other out. All right. So the first one I want to talk to you about is called artdeadline.com. They have both a free and a subscription version. You can browse by opportunity type, whether it's grants or jobs or residencies. You can also browse by the kind of benefit it offers. In other words, what is the funding intended for? Maybe it's professional development, maybe it's emergency relief, maybe it's special projects, maybe it's ongoing work. They also have a way to sort by category or specific discipline, or by the date posted. Another thing most of these sites are also going to include is some kind of way to sort by geographic location. And sometimes that's really important to pay attention to because there are grant opportunities that are only available to certain people in certain areas. Another great resource is the Cranbrook Research Guides. And this is actually a wealth of information because it includes not just information about grants and other funding sources for individuals, but there's also job listings in there. Again, artist residencies. These opportunities are listed by visual, performing, and literary artists. And so, that's a great one too. The New York Foundation for the Arts has their own grant programs, and they also aggregate other grants that are searchable or sortable, again, by location, by application fee or not. Another thing to pay attention to, sometimes you have to pay an application fee. So think about that. They also are sortable by opportunity type, again, by discipline, all that kind of good stuff. Um, this one's really kind of a mind blower for a lot of people. A lot of the visual artists in the room, if we want to call it that, y'all know Cafe as a website that offers calls to artists and opportunities. I don't know if you also knew that they have a listing of fellowships and grants and residencies and workshops and lots more. And again, it's searchable and sortable by the call type, by the eligibility criteria, by the project budget, which is really nice, and by the month of the deadline. So that's a great one to look at. If you're using Cafe to look for art calls, you can actually also use Cafe to look for funding opportunities. Creativecapital.org, again, they have their own grant programs and also a database of other funding opportunities like grants and fellowships, jobs, residencies, all that kind of stuff. And it's all searchable and sortable, again, by all of those types and locations and criteria. Instrumental is another one. This one is subscription based, but I will tell you, um, it's it gives you the opportunity to see who the different funders are and sort of their areas of focus. So if you see one on Instrumentable that might be a good fit for you, you can just visit the funding source directly and, outside of Instrumental platform to learn more about it. You can see, even if you don't have a subscription, you can still see like the grants. You just can't like click into them very far. So Instrumental is a good one, whether you want to have a subscription to it really or not. And then we've got the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. This has emergency grants for visual, performing, and literary arts, as well as other funding opportunities. I hope that none of you ever need to even think about that. I don't want it to even cross your mind. But the fact is, things happen. And sometimes we need a little bit extra support to get us over the hump of something that was unexpected. And it's nice to know that those opportunities are out there. Another one like that is Surf Plus. They are the Craft Emergency Relief Fund. And again, they're for craft artists. They do incredible work. They swoop in when times are tough and they really, really help out. So again, this is just 8 places for you to look for opportunities. There are lots more out there. So go ahead and start researching. You can start with these or any that we've added into the chat while I've been talking, but you can also like just poke around and look for places like that on your own. Okay, now let's move on to thinking strategically before you apply. Our next slide is going to give us some ideas about how to do this. So let's just say that you start poking around at, one of these, spots that I have suggested, and you have found a funding opportunity that looks really good. Make sure that it's actually a fit before you get all excited and dive in head first. Okay? Don't write a grant just because the money looks good. All right? Make sure that the fit is being considered. Okay? The fit matters more than forcing it. Save your energy for the right match. The best way to determine if this grant that you have found really is a fit is to read the guidelines. I know this sounds crazy, but reading the guidelines is absolutely illuminating. Guidelines can be complicated, and there's usually a lot packed in there. So read the guidelines carefully and then ask yourself, are you even eligible for this particular opportunity? Does it fund individual artists or not? Because not all grants do. If this doesn't fund individual artists, but the rest is like a perfect match, then maybe consider partnering with someone else or with a fiscal sponsor, like I talked about earlier. Another thing to pay attention to when you read the guidelines, am I in the right location? Like I said, some opportunities are reserved for artists in specific geographic areas. Another question, am I in the right career stage? Some grants are for emerging artists only, or maybe for those who are mid-career and have developed a significant body of work. Another thing to think about, is my discipline and project type a match? If you're a writer, but this grant opportunity that you have found supports dancers, don't go run out and learn the Martha Graham technique. I mean, okay, do that if you want to, but don't do it specifically for this grant. Find a different funding opportunity. Okay? Maybe this opportunity that you found is for community-based public arts engagement. But what you're actually looking for is something that supports your sort of quiet, introverted, individual studio practice. Find a different grant. Another good question. What kinds of projects or grantees have they funded in the past? Okay, most grantors will list the recent grantees and a description of their funded projects. So take a look to see if any of the previously funded proposals look anything like yours. I mean, obviously it's not going to look exactly like yours, but if they don't look anything like what you're doing, move on. Unless, there's one caveat here, unless they have specifically said that they're changing their funding focus, which does occasionally happen. Okay? Another thing to think about, is this the kind of money that I actually need? Is this grant for project support? Is it for career development? Is it for emergency aid? Decide if that actually fits the bill or not. Another good thing to worry about is, what's the total funding amount? What's available versus how many people are vying for it? Funding is tight. We all know this. It's not a secret. It's getting tighter practically by the minute, it feels like. But if they have a relatively small funding pool and a relatively large number of applicants, consider whether that's worth your time. And vice versa. If it's a big funding pool and they don't usually get very many applicants, jump on that. Okay? As long as it's a fit everywhere else. if they don't give that kind of information in the guidelines, if they don't say that kind of, detail, you can always contact the grant administrator to ask these kinds of questions. All right. So don't be shy about doing that. Another good question, what's the grant cycle? Does the timing of this grant that you found fit the timing of your project? Things like, when's the application due? When is the notification date when they tell you whether they got the award, or not? When are the funds going to be paid? When are reports due, if any? Um, a question for yourself is, can I meet those deadlines and those requirements? Um, do check on the reporting requirement. Ask how many reports, how in depth are they? Do they need to see things like copies of receipts and itemized time logs? So think about the administrative lift, and make sure that you're up to it. Okay. Many funding opportunities are annual. So if you don't feel like you can give the application or the reporting the attention that it deserves right now because of, other commitments or whatever might be happening in your world, just mark that grant down, especially if it was a really, really good fit otherwise, and come back to it later because odds are it'll come around again. Okay. Another good thing to think about and ask yourself, are there any budget caps or any restrictions on how the funding can be used? Make sure that you're not considering these funds for non-allowable expenses. All right. Do they require matching funds? We'll talk a little bit more about matching funds in a minute, but not all grants just give you money. Sometimes they're asking for a little skin in the game on your part. And so those matching funds might come in the form of cash. They might come in the form of in-kind value. So those are things to consider too. I also want for you to think about how they handle copyrights. Okay, this should be in the guidelines somewhere. Some grantors retain the copyrights of the thing that they have paid for that you produce. Some ask for the artist's permission just to use that work for educational or promotional purposes only. But the artist retains the copyrights. So find that information and decide what's acceptable to you. Okay. If you are unsure of any of the answers to these questions, contact the grant administrator. Okay. It's not just allowed, it's encouraged. They want to give you the money. It is literally their job. So don't be afraid of grant administrators. I'll admit we can be a little bit scary because we have to do like compliance and all that kind of jazz, but we are on your side, I promise. Okay. What this all boils down to is one major takeaway. Make sure that the funding opportunity that you have found is actually a fit for what you need. Okay. If you take one thing away from today's conversation, I want it to be this. Don't create a project to chase a grant. Find a grant to fit your project. Don't twist yourself all up into knots trying to squeeze into something that isn't right for you or your work or your vision. Stay true to what you know you need to create and your overall capacity to do it. You'll find the right supporters if you do that, I promise. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, which is thinking about preparing to apply. All right, what do we need to gather? Most grant applications are going to ask you approximately the same basic things. Okay, you'll save hours, absolutely hours, if you gather these materials first. Okay, doing this is going to help you not only with this one application that you are going for, but for any others that you might decide to seek out as well. So I'd recommend that you pull all this information into a Word document so that you can cut and paste your answers later easily back into the application fields once you've got everything prepared. Okay. In fact, I would recommend that you start a grant folder for each application so that you can keep everything in one place. You can kind of think of it as like your grant toolkit. And you're going to want to keep it updated so you're always ready. You never know when a new, cool, perfect opportunity is going to come your way. All right. So, in your toolkit, what you're going to need to include is some really basic and general contact information. And believe it or not, there are some people who fall down at this point. Make sure that the email address that you've provided in your application or the one that you've used to create your account with this entity or this platform or whatever this funder is using as the portal for this opportunity is an email address that you actually use and check on a regular basis. You don't want to miss any grant related correspondence. Okay, so once you're sure you're giving them the right contact information, you're then going to need some kind of a bio or an artist statement of some kind. You're going to need a CV or a resume. These are different documents. Okay, let's look just really quickly at how they're different. All right, a CV, curriculum vitae, is a comprehensive career spanning document. It includes all of your relevant experience, like exhibitions, residencies, publications, teaching, grants, other grants, fellowships, all that kind of stuff. It's usually many pages long, especially if you're later in your career. And it's generally going to read like a professional history or like a record of all your accomplishments. It's usually used in academic or institutional settings and also grant settings, where funders really want to see like the breadth of your career. A resume, conversely, is condensed, right? So it's a selective version of the things that you've accomplished. It's 1, 2 pages max, and it focuses on the most relevant experiences for this opportunity. Okay, it's going to emphasize the skills and the achievements or the projects that are aligned directly with what this grant's purpose is. Okay, this is easy for panelists because they can scan it really quickly. And the fact is, they're reviewing a lot of applications. So something that they can scan quickly is really helpful. If the grant application specifies that they want you to include a CV in the guidelines, they expect a CV, your full career document. If they ask for a resume, give them a resume, a 1, maybe 2 page tailored version of what you've achieved. Okay. Some grant applications are going to allow you to submit either. And this is where strategy comes in. Okay. If either a CV or a resume are allowed, or if it's sort of unclear, I generally recommend that you use a resume, especially if you're early in your career or you want to keep things really concise and focus. You can use a CV if you have like a really robust record and want to show the full scope and scale of your career. I would recommend, though, tailoring either one, no matter which one you choose, go ahead and tailor it to this grant opportunity. Even a CV can be edited to emphasize the most relevant sections, okay? So, like, highlight your community projects if you're going for a community-based grant. For a resume, lead with the experiences that most directly connect to the funder's priorities. Okay, here's an optional hybrid strategy. Some artists keep both a CV and a resume, and for grants, they'll maybe submit the resume as requested, but include a link to their full CV, maybe on their website. So that way, the panel has both and the option to dig in deeper if they want to. Okay. Another thing that you're gonna inevitably be asked to provide are work samples. And work samples sort of correlate a little bit with the conversation between CV versus resume. Okay. So your work samples are going to be either images or videos or links. One of the things that a lot of artists start worrying about is, especially if you work in different styles or different media or techniques or even different disciplines, sometimes the dilemma is, do you show breadth in your work samples or depth in your work samples? Your work samples should make it easy for the grant panelists to understand your artistic voice and skill and relevance to the grant. Okay? Choose depth if you need to show a cohesive body of work and pieces that are related to one another stylistically or thematically or technically. Okay. This helps the reviewer see your clarity of vision and your mastery. This is especially good when the grant is for a specific project or when you can only upload a handful of images. Sometimes you only get to upload like 5 or 10 images. So think about depth in those cases. Think about breadth, which is sometimes useful in situations where you need to show your range. Okay. If the grant is specifically about like versatility or experimentation or innovation, all right? Or if you need to demonstrate capacity in multiple modalities or multiple ways. For instance, let's say you propose a multimedia project. So you're going to want to show samples in painting and poetry. Okay. So this works best if you still curate with intention. Don't just give them a sampler platter like they're barreling up to the buffet. Okay. You want to show them some cohesive, intentional choices. Think sort of like, here's the spectrum of what I do, not here's everything I've ever tried in my life. Okay. Um, some of the best strategies for mixed media style artists are to think about cohesion. Again, pick the strongest and most relevant works or series for the grant's goals. Okay. Add range in strategically. If you show more than one style or medium, be clear about that in your artist statement somewhere or in the captions. Tell them why you're doing that. For instance, like let's say you want to tell them that my dance practice informs the way I approach my video works because both explore the theme of resilience through movement, something like that. Okay. So again, I want you to think about quality over quantity. All right. Strong and well documented samples in one style are usually more compelling than a sort of scattershot, hot mix, throwing spaghetti at a wall kind of approach. Regardless of what you choose, I'm going to encourage you to match your samples to your proposal. If your proposal is in one medium, don't distract the panelists with unrelated work, even if it's really, really good work. Okay? Stick to what proves you can execute this grant project that you're proposing and that you're asking them to pay for. Okay? Sometimes you can supplement with links to other works, but if they give you 10 samples only to include, use those required samples for cohesion, and then if allowed, go ahead and provide links to additional works that can show your range. That way, the panelists who are curious can explore more without watering down or confusing your grant submission. Okay, you're also going to need to include some kind of a website or a portfolio in your applications that, is a good way for panelists to sort of, take a look at what you're doing. If you don't have a website or an online portfolio, I'd encourage you to get busy on that. Okay. You're also going to need to include a realistic and thoughtful project timeline. Emphasis on realistic. We all know things take longer and are more expensive than we think. All right, same for your budget. If the grantor gives you a budget template, use that. Don't go rogue and fill out a spreadsheet however you want. Use their template if they give you one. And as you're filling it out, think about realistic budget numbers. We're going to talk a little bit more about budget and timeline in a sec. Occasionally, they're going to be asking you for letters of support or maybe references. If you do need to include something like that, include letters of support or references from people or entities that have some correlation with what you're actually proposing in the grant. Okay, don't go out of left field. Then you're also going to be able to briefly describe or list any partners or collaborators who might be working with you on this project. So you're going to want to have those conversations, and maybe you don't need to have everything like lined up, but at least have preliminary conversations with the people who might be working with you on this project to make sure that they're in. Um, then you're going to need a project description, some kind of a narrative written in a very clear and easy to understand way with a compelling reason for why. Okay, that's sort of like the meat of your application. And we're going to talk a lot more about crafting that narrative in a minute. But this is the basic sort of formula for what, generally speaking, you're going to be asked to provide for most grant applications. You're going to want to format these things properly. You're going to need to pay attention to the kinds of uploadable file formats that are acceptable. Make sure you are able to submit a PDF if they ask you for a PDF. And frankly, I'm going to tell you to avoid sending in Word documents altogether anyhow. Just go ahead and send them PDFs. Um, Also be really careful to adhere to any file naming conventions that they ask for. Sometimes they'll ask for your last name and then like an underscore and then like a description of what the document is. Please do not title your files final underscore, I mean it this time seriously, underscore PDF. Okay? Y'all, the panelists can like see that. So it's not a good look. Don't do that. All right. I'm going to go to the next slide. And this is sort of a little bit of an aside, but I wanted to mention it. Occasionally, a funder will ask for a letter of interest before you even have an opportunity to fill out a grant application. It's helpful for them. It helps them narrow down the field of applicants and choose artists to invite to apply. So a letter of interest or an LOI is sort of like your first impression. It's like a pitch for why you and your work would be a great fit for this particular grant opportunity. Kind of like a mini grant application. It's going to be short, usually one, maybe 2 pages. It needs to be clear, it needs to be compelling, and it needs to be tailored. And here's what you're going to need to include some kind of an introduction. Tell them hi. Tell them a little bit about your artistic practice. Give them a brief project description with what you plan to do and the purpose for the funding. Tell them why this project matters. Why does it matter to you? Why does it matter to your community or the field? And how does it fit with the funder's goals? Okay. You're going to give them brief career highlights and how the funding might help advance your career. And you're going to give them a closing statement. Keep it professional, but warm. And think about it as though you're inviting curiosity, not convincing them of everything. Okay. Less is more with an LOI or a letter of interest. So leave them wanting to see your portfolio and more from you. Okay, let's talk about writing a little bit in the next slide. We are going to tell your story as clearly as possible. Okay. Once you find a grant that fits, and I mean really fits, not just like, well, let's just see what happens. I mean really fits. Dedicate uninterrupted time to writing your project narrative. Again, this is like the meat. This is the meat of the grant application sandwich. So, I am going to encourage you to start this project narrative in a Word document. Do not start your narrative in the online grant portal. Y'all, some portals do not save as you go, and trust me, you will be like literally sick to your stomach if you lose the work that's been drafted in a portal. I am speaking from personal experience. And I think we've all been in that situation at some point. So copy and paste each of the questions from the actual grant application into a Word document. Okay, like make a fake grant application with just blanks for you to fill in, okay? Using the actual questions and craft your narrative in the Word document, okay? And then once it's all gussied up and perfect, you can use that narrative to paste your answers back into the application fields on the online portal, okay? So here's what I want you to think about as you start thinking about crafting your grant narrative. Most grant panels are made up of artists and administrators who want to fund good work. We are rooting for you, but we can't read your mind. So your job is to make your story clear and compelling in the narrative portion of your grant application. All right, this is the part that describes your whole reason for being. Tell them what you're trying to accomplish and why. Answer the key questions that funders are going to usually ask. Sometimes they don't use these exact words, but they basically go like this. What's the project? Why does it matter? Why are you tackling it now? How will you do it? Who's it for? What impact will it have? How will you evaluate or measure success? For measuring success and evaluation, I'm not going to go into that because honestly, it's a whole other thing. But let me just say, use specific and measurable objectives. Don't just say, this is going to inspire people. I'm sure it will. But you'll get a lot farther if you say something like, this will engage 75 community members in 3 hands-on workshops. Okay? All right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to keep your writing clear and compelling. Write like you speak. Be clear, not fancy pants. Use plain language, not jargon. All right? That's true for your narrative. It's true for your letter of interest. It's also true for your artist statement. But that, again, that's a whole other webinar. Don't even get me started, oh my gosh, on artist statements that are completely indecipherable. We'll talk about that some other time. But for your grant narrative, don't shut people out by being enigmatic or by trying to be intellectual or academic. This can alienate them from what you're trying to communicate, and it can make people question whether you actually understand it or not. So don't put the panelists or yourself in that position. Write the way you'd speak. Okay? Be specific. Give the what, the why, the how, and the when. Arguably, the why is the most important part of writing a compelling grant application. Show why your work matters. Why does it matter emotionally, culturally, or socially? Show why this funder should pay for it. This is critical to a successful grant application. Developing your why is going to help you throughout the whole arc of the entire project. Think of it sort of like a mini mission statement for your project. And it can be really like your touchstone. When things sort of inevitably start to like get weebly wobbly and you start to wander or lose focus, go back to your why. And if the detour doesn't match the original purpose, ditch it. Okay. Your why is your touchstone. Connect your project to your community, your discipline, your audience. Tell them how, tell the panelists how the community or the audience is involved. What do they stand to gain through your project? All right. Connect your project also to the funders' priorities. This is like next level stuff, y'all. This is strategery in overdrive. All right. Look up your funder in like their about section on their website. Read their mission statement. Read their vision statement, read their philosophy, go back to the grant guidelines, look at those goals, look at the scoring rubric if you have access to it. Use their words back to them. Parrot what they care about and tell them how you're going to address that through your own practice. Write like you're talking to a smart friend who knows nothing about your field. But don't assume your panelists are stupid because I can assure you that they are not. But make sure that you're doing your best to get to the heart of what you're trying to say quickly and concisely. They've got a lot of applications to get through, so don't make it hard for them to understand yours. Okay? All right, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to show you some tricks for being concise. All right, y'all, respect the word limit. These are no jokes. Most grant applications have some kind of a word or a character limit. You got to be mindful of those when you're crafting your answers. And there are some tricks to editing for word counts and just frankly for writing in general. So one of the things that I will confess is that I am rather long-winded, and I know that about myself, and I tend to write long first and then I cut. So my advice is to get all your ideas down and then start editing for clarity and for brevity. It's usually easier to cut than it is to expand. Okay. One good thing is to lose those filler phrases. Let's cut to the chase. We don't need to say in order to when we can just say to, right? Get rid of the qualifiers. Words like very or really or somewhat or extremely, y'all don't need those words. They are almost never necessary. Get rid of redundancy. You don't need to say each and every. You don't need to say past history. All right. So make sure you're being really strong about not repeating yourself. Use strong verbs. Instead of I am working on creating, just say I'm creating. It's okay. We'll get there. Try and combine sentences if you can, instead of saying, my work explores memory, period. It often uses found objects, period. You can say, my work explores memory through found objects. It means exactly the same thing. You've gotten rid of a few words. Okay, some formatting and structure tricks that might help. If you can use bullet points, go for it. They usually take fewer words, and frankly, they're a lot easier for the panelists to scan. What I would recommend too, if you're using a bulleted list, put the most important information first, prioritize that. And if you run out of space, you can cut from the bottom up. So it gives you like a faster way to kind of edit. Tighten up your career highlights. I'm sure you guys have bagfuls of incredible stuff that you're really, really proud of. But instead of listing each one as a full sentence, maybe try grouping them like solo exhibitions, colon, and then say, you know, like Mocha 2022, Coca 2021. I will say though, maybe that wasn't the best example because I do want you to use the full name of the institution and double check those names because really there's nothing worse than you accidentally referring to someone who's given you a really prestigious, you know, exhibition incorrectly. So look it up, make sure you're saying it and including it in the right way. Okay. And then lastly, polish Polish, polish, polish. Read what you have written aloud. And if you stumble, see if you can rewrite it and see if you can rewrite it shorter. Okay. Use that word count tool, y'all, in Word or in the Google Docs as you edit. Word count will save you a ton of headaches later. And just make sure that you're in alignment with whatever the word counts are in the actual application. All right. So think of the word counts as sort of like, a creative constraint. All right. Funders want to know that you can be concise and that you're focused, which is a skill in and of itself. And then I would also have someone who's not familiar with your work or this particular project that you're proposing, go ahead and read your proposal. And if they don't understand it, you've got more work to do. All right. All right, let's hop over into the budget territory. Oh boy. All right, next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about budgets. And the fact is, they really are just your story in numbers. So don't be afraid of the budget. A good one is really a map of your project that helps panelists and you better understand where the grant dollars would go. So most budgets are going to need to include things like artist fees. That's you. Pay yourself in your budget. You're also going to want to pay other people. If you've got any collaborators or fabricators or partners or editors or subcontractors, anyone like that, you're going to need to allocate some money to pay them. You're also going to need to put in there any materials or supplies, any equipment or rentals, space or venue fees, anything related to marketing and outreach, especially if you're doing anything related to like community engagement or public communication. And then this is a spot where we as artists often sort of fall a little bit short, which is documentation. So this might be photos or videos or interviews. And frankly, we have a tendency to really focus on doing the work and getting it done. And we're not really all that focused on sort of recording the process of the work getting done. So try and build some funding into your budget for documentation. And again, that's going to take the form of like videos or photographs or interviews or whatever. And the fact is, not only is that going to be nice for you at the end of the project to look back on, those kinds of artifacts are also really helpful for future grants. So think about that as an investment in the next phase. Then there might be some evaluation costs. You might need to do some kind of digital or in-person surveys, maybe a printed response or like a mailer or something like that. Make sure you put in some money for travel or lodging, accommodations, or food if it's allowable because a lot of grants don't allow for these kinds of expenses. So make extra super duper sure that your grant does. And if it doesn't, think about whether or not you could include these costs as part of a match. We talked briefly about the idea of the match. And, a matching requirement for a grant could be in kind value. Like, let's say somebody's loaning you their vacation home or their studio space or something like that, and you're going to work out of it for the next 6 months or something. That value could be used as part of an in kind match. Or if you plan to go out of pocket for anything, that can be used as part of a cash match. Okay. So think about where you can kind of fill up the various buckets of the budget if you need to. And then finally, I really think you guys need a contingency, like probably 10 or 15%, because things do not always go to plan and costs will likely increase during the time that it takes for you to build this budget and the time that it takes to actually get the grant and start implementing it. It can be like 6 months or more sometimes. So give yourself a bit of a pad, a cushion, an insurance policy, okay, with a contingency fund. If you're able to try and include documentation or quotes or estimates where possible. And definitely be able, if you're asked, to explain how you arrived at these numbers. Okay. Use round numbers. There's no sense in adding cents into a grant budget. Okay, so just round up, but don't inflate your numbers. Okay, keep it realistic. Don't lie. Don't inflate your numbers. Keep it realistic. Okay, let's slide into time. Our timetable. So we've now got the money part figured out. Let's figure out the time part. We're going to keep the grant cycle in mind. As we're building this draft timeline, we are going to start keeping a calendar for planning purposes. It doesn't need to be fancy. It can just be paper or it can be something, more tech heavy. It doesn't matter. But just put in all the key benchmark dates that are required by the grantor. Okay, that way you've got all the grantor's requirements and expectations built into your calendar. Things like, they're usually in the grant guidelines, so you don't have to hunt for them. But if they're not, contact the grant administrator and ask about them. Stuff like the deadline, reporting deadlines, the notification time period, all that kind of stuff. I then, once I have all of the grantors' dates into my calendar, I usually like to work backwards at this point. I start at the end of the project, like, when it's going to be due, the thing, whatever it is that you've done, whatever you've created, the project, the artifact, whatever, then work your way back towards the now, okay? That just works for me. It might not work for you, whatever. But I always, no matter what, I add in more time than I think, especially if I'm collaborating with anyone else. Because the fact is, you can't account for someone else's timeliness. And life happens, the world happens. So let's don't get stressed out and just give yourself plenty, plenty, plenty of time. Okay. If your project is flexible in terms of timing, that's fine, that's great. But funders usually want to know that you've at least thought it through. You've thought about timing. So show them that. You're gonna probably have to show them that. So make sure that you include, again, your own planning and prep time, any ordering and delivery of materials and supplies, which can take longer than you think. Sometimes things are back ordered or there's some kind of a delay or whatever. The creation or the production of what you're delivering as, again, that final product or that artifact. It might be a new play. It might be a book of short stories. It might be an exhibition. So how long is it going to take you to do the thing? Um, there's sometimes some kind of a public presentation for the thing. Maybe it's an exhibition opening, or maybe it's a staged reading, or maybe it's a performance or an unveiling event. Make sure you leave enough time for evaluation too. Remember, you got to give people enough time to respond. If you're asking them about their feedback, their assessment, give them enough time to actually tell you. And give yourself enough time to actually analyze those responses. All right. Then be sure that you're building in any reporting requirements too. All right. You may have to consider the fact that your grant funds are likely going to be released in stages. And those are usually triggered by like agreed upon deliverables. So you might run into a cash flow issue if you don't plan the timing properly. Um, so, think about the timing and when the funds will be delivered. We'll talk about deliverables in just a second, so hang on to that thought. But for the timing, keep it realistic. Again, don't overpromise. I've learned that just about everything takes longer than I think it will when I'm planning it in the beginning. Okay, so let's slide on over to the actual application submission. At this point, you have either created or gathered all the individual elements that you need to start filling in the actual grant application. So you've got it all in a Word document, right? and you've been double checking the word counts, right? So you can start cutting and pasting your answers in. But before you start doing that, please, for the love of everything holy, proofread, proofread, proofread. Please make sure that you are not submitting grants with typos. Get someone else to look at it too. Do not submit a grant with a typo or an error. It is not good. And if there are a lot of errors, panelists may start to question your attention to detail and your ability to follow through on a project in a professional way. So remember, this is your first impression and you want to make it a good one and you want to stand out for the right reasons, not because your application is full of typos. Okay, so once you're sure you're good to go, start copying and pasting, upload any digital files that you've compiled as PDFs, not Word documents, using professional file names and proper file formats. Don't call your final files final underscore use this one. Okay? Panelists can see that. You don't want them to see that. Look everything over one more time and hit submit. Once you've hit submit, you are probably going to get some kind of a confirmation email, okay? And this email is going to go to the email address that you gave them in the beginning, all right? So check that email address. Check it. Make sure that there's a confirmation email there. If there's not, contact the grant administrator and ask them because there's a chance that that means that your application didn't go through. But have no fear because you've got it all. You've got all the info in a file, and it's no big deal. If you need to do it again, it's no big deal. This is also one reason not to wait until the 11th hour of the deadline. From personal experience, I know that we all love a deadline and we love to cut it real close. So try to submit at least a couple of days before the deadline in case something goes sideways. Okay, then you have time to fix it. Once you get your confirmation letter, hang on to it and hang on to a copy of your application, okay, so that you can refer back to it later if needed. That confirmation letter is probably going to include some additional details, like when the panelists are going to meet to review the applications, along with other dates and stuff. So go ahead and add those dates, if you haven't already, to the calendar that you created for this grant opportunity. You might have the chance to attend the grant panel either in person or on the phone or digitally. I would highly recommend that you do. Sometimes they take place in private, but if it's open to the public, try and attend there for several reasons. Really, one, you'll be able to offer an update on your application if there is one, and you'll be able to answer the panelists' questions if they have any. Um, Two, your attendance shows that you're invested in the outcome. Three, you'll learn a ton by listening to the panelists' conversations and discussions of other applicants' submissions. And finally, you're going to understand the process a whole lot more. And that can be used in refining your own grant writing techniques and your strategies for future applications. Okay, let's talk about notification. So this slide is going to remind you to be on the lookout. After that panelist review meeting, you're going to be looking for that notification letter at that email address that you gave them. All right. The date or the time frame for when the grantor plans to notify applicants of the outcome is usually listed in the guidelines, and hopefully you've added that to your grant calendar that you've created for this opportunity. If not, it's in the guidelines. If it's not in the guidelines, contact the grant administrator and ask them when you can expect to hear back about the grant awards. All right, there's really two scenarios at the point of notification. All right, scenario number one, you didn't get the grant. That's totally a bummer. It's 100% a bummer, and you get to feel sorry for yourself for exactly 24 hours. And then I want you to realize that you've got all the tools now to write another one which will be so much easier now that you're organized. And the fact is, any new application is just probably going to need like slight refinements or refocusing to a new funding opportunity. Okay, so don't feel too badly about that. If you don't get the grant, I would definitely recommend that you kindly ask to see any feedback from the panelists or the grant administrator and use that feedback to strengthen your application for next time. Okay. The last thing you need to do if you don't get the grant is to thank the funders in writing. Yes, if you don't get the grant, you want to thank them. Aside from the fact that this is just good manners, you just never know. You never know. By doing that, it gets you on their radar in a different way. And it's, I think, a really smart and strategic move and just a classy one, too. Okay, scenario number two. You did get the grant. Ah. You can celebrate again for exactly 24 hours. And then you've got to buckle down and get to work. But the first thing you have to do is thank the funders in writing. Yep. Whether you get the grant or not, you got to thank the funders in writing. It's just the right thing to do. So do it. All right, next, you got the grant. Let's move on to what you do. Probably there's going to be some kind of an email with like next steps that the grant administrator is going to send you. All right, so follow those instructions to the letter. They may need you to formally accept the award or acknowledge it in some way. Then they're going to send you some kind of an agreement, probably. Carefully review that agreement. It might be called an agreement, it might be called a contract, whatever, it's the same thing. Pay attention to the language in there, especially the copyright language. Again, if the copyright language is not listed in the agreement, or if it differs from what was in the guidelines or what you were told by the grant administrator, bring that up. All right. If the agreement includes a series of deliverables, make sure that the deliverables are correct and realistic. Okay, generally those deliverables are put into place to help break up the project into sort of like manageable pieces that will then sort of each trigger a grant payment installment. It's basically sort of like your benchmarks of like, once I've accomplished this, I'm on to the next phase. Once I've accomplished this, I'm on to the next phase. The development, though, of those deliverables probably needs to be at least a little bit collaborative between you and the grant administrator so that they're realistic and well-timed and achievable. All right, so check those deliverables if there are any. Then submit your payment information so that you can get the first installment of the grant award. It's unlikely that they're going to give you the whole entire grant as one lump sum. They don't usually do that. But regardless, give them your payment information so that you can get some money to get going. All right, reserve any important dates that are new or different to your calendar and keep maintaining and updating that calendar as you go. Your dates and deadlines might change. They might adjust a little bit or slide a little bit. And if they do, it's probably okay, but make sure that you're notifying the grant administrator of those changes, okay? Small ones, probably no big deal, but bigger ones might need some kind of an amendment, and this goes for budgetary changes as well as timing changes, okay? So let your administrator know if anything is different or starts to look a little out of whack, and they can help you. They can't help you if you don't tell them, all right? The next thing you're going to do is you're going to alert any of your subcontractors or partners or colleagues to the fact that you got the grant. And now you're going to be moving forward with the project, which means that you're moving forward and working with them. So go ahead and solidify those plans, those dates, and those budget numbers with them. Okay. Then I know it's exciting, but try to wait for that first payment, the first installment of the grant award before you start making any purchases. Okay. Try not to go out of pocket if you can avoid it until you get that first installment of the funding. Save a copy of your application and your notification and your contract. Okay, you're going to want to refer back to it as needed and as you go, because I tell you what, it's really easy to forget what you said you would do. And it's really important that you do what you said you do. All right, so keep it on hand to refer back to when needed. Then you're going to initiate the project. You're going to do the thing. And you're going to follow your own roadmap that you created for this grant application. You have developed all the tools to stay on track. So just do the thing. And while you're doing the thing, document doing the thing all along the way. Keep in mind too that any public promotion about the project or the grant award itself, make sure to include and thank your funder, even if it's just on social media. Okay, many grantors require this. So make sure that you're doing it exactly the way that they've outlined. Sometimes it's just including a logo, sometimes it's including a line of text, sometimes it's both, but don't neglect this detail. Then you're going to complete any reporting requirements. There might be multiple reports along the way that are required. So save your receipts if needed, collect invoices, collaborators' credentials, anything that they're going to need for those reports. Make sure you're saving what the grantor needs, and make sure you're saving what you need for your own record keeping and accounting later. They may not be the same thing. So make sure that you've got the grantor taken care of and yourself taken care of. When the project is complete, you're going to send another thank you letter. I mean, you're thanking these people all over the place because, again, that's the right thing to do. And they're helping you to make it happen. And when it's all over and you've turned in the final report and it's all tied up with a big bow, see if you can offer any kind, constructive, and specific suggestions to the grant administrator on improving their process. Believe it or not, we want to hear that. We like to hear that. We want to know how to make things better and more streamlined. Sometimes what makes it more streamlined for you doesn't make it more streamlined for us, so it might not necessarily materialize your suggestion, but it's helpful for us to know. And then lastly, go get another grant because you know you can do it and you've got all the tools. So you have heard everything that I know at this point about how to do this well. And hopefully you've got lots of questions for me so that if I missed a step somewhere in the telling, you can ask and I can try and fill in the gaps.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. That was very informative and impactful. And you have said all the things I wish I could say while applications are open. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
we're going to move now to the Q&A section of the webinar. And again, if you have any remaining questions, please place them in the Q&A pod. We have about 8 minutes for questions, so I'm going to try to move through as quickly as I can. All right, first question. What would you recommend for emerging artists in terms of listing experience?
Yeah. So that's definitely, a tricky one. If you're at the beginning of your career, you may not have a ton to share. But I think in those situations, again, finding the right fit of grant is really critical because there are grants out there that are specifically for people just like you. So I would tell them what you do well, show them what you've got to show, and hopefully the funders that you are talking to are ones that absolutely understand that you're early in your career. Another kind of good way to do that if you're new to grant writing or if you're early in your career is maybe start sort of smaller, start local. find some opportunities in your own community that might fit with not only your need, but also sort of where you are in your career. Maybe don't take a big swing at a federal, like, National Endowment for the Arts grant yet, although maybe you do. So I would say be confident in your abilities, be confident in what you've already accomplished, find funding opportunities that align with that. All right. Don't try and go up in competitive situations with other artists who maybe have 30 years on you. Okay. It's a different ball game. You're playing in a slightly different field for now. You'll get there, but find the opportunities that meet where you are and harness them.
Thank you. All right, next question. Suggestions of what to include in budget for a writer attending a residency aside from travel, lodging, and artist fees.
Yeah. Okay, so I would include any materials that you might bring with you. If you have a particular love, I know there are some people that are really dedicated to their pens or their pencil, and they have a very specific notebook that they like to write in. I mean, those are all tools and materials for your profession. So go ahead and list that. I mean, that's probably going to be a pretty nominal amount. And the fact is, for literary artists, there aren't a whole lot of hard costs. I mean, maybe you can include some software. It sort of depends on what's allowable. That's another thing that I know I've, said a couple of times that some of these funding opportunities have restrictions. Some of them are not gonna pay for food. You can't ask for it. Some of them are not going to pay for software. But if this particular funding opportunity does allow for that, heck, go ahead and prorate the amount of cost for the time that you're going to be at that residency for your Microsoft suite or for your internet connection or, any of those kinds of things. Double check though first and make sure that that's okay. Before you just do it. Again, because some funding is allowable for some expenses and it's not for others. But you're right. I mean, being a writer is a little bit of a low overhead type of endeavor. So I would make sure that you're paying yourself enough too. If there's some kind of a stipend that goes along with the fellowship or the residency, think about how to make sure that you're caring for yourself too.
All right, we have three more questions, and I'm gonna try to get through those before we cut out. So,
Okay.
should we be reaching for long shot grants, or is it better to focus on the ones that seem more likely? Less applicants, less prestige, better chances.
Well, I'm going to tell you very honestly, I'm relatively risk averse just as a human walking through the world. And so I personally like a safer bet. But it's really up to you. It's up to you to determine how you want to spend your time. Because the fact of the matter is, putting together a grant application and submitting it is an investment in time. And so, I would go for something that's probably going to net me greater results for the amount of time that I'm investing. But if you're a gambler and you've got time on your hands, swing for the fences. There's no reason not to. And maybe a strategy where it's a little bit of a combination of both. Maybe at any given point, you've got more than one application out there. One's sort of like a moonshot, and one's a little bit more of a sure bet.
Do you recommend the use of fiscal sponsors?
I love a fiscal sponsor. I have worked in organizations that served as a fiscal sponsor, and so it can really be a very helpful way to kind of get over what would otherwise be a major hurdle for an individual artist. So partnering with your local arts agency, partnering with some other entity that's a nonprofit can often get you where you want to go and give you a friend at the same time, a collaborator, someone to help tell your story, and maybe you can create a relationship that's ongoing. So I love the idea of a fiscal sponsor. I don't know how many cons are attached to that. Sometimes there's an administrative fee, but those are all things that you would want to work out with them in your own situation.
Okay, and we have time for one more that's really quick.
Okay.
Thank you letter, physical or email?
I'm a physical kind of gal. I really love something that's handwritten and put in the mail. But the fact of the matter is, not everybody gets mail anymore. So what's the harm in doing it both ways? I mean, kill them with kindness, right? Do it digitally and physically.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. Again, this has been very informative and impactful. We thank all of you who were able to stay. We've placed the link to the survey in the chat. We will also be sure to email the link to the recording as well as the slides as soon as they become available. The recording will also be hosted on our website, southarts.org, on the resources section. And until next time, thank you all so much for attending.